Go eat outside in the street. Beggar, my son yelled when I tried to join the family dinner. Go eat outside in the street, you beggar. My son Robert yelled when I tried to sit down at the table in the restaurant. I took a deep breath, motioned to the waiter, and responded calmly. That's fine, but then you will be the ones who have to leave here. The words left my mouth with a composure I hadn't expected myself. All the diners at the Golden Crown restaurant turned to look at us. Robert froze, his face red with shame. His wife, Jessica, dropped her glass of wine onto the white tablecloth. What my son didn't know was who I truly am. My name is Susan. I'm 65 years old, and that night, everything was going to change forever. But let me tell you how I got to that moment, because what happened after my words was something no one, absolutely no one, expected. It all started 3 hours earlier, when Robert called me on the phone. Mum, I want to take you out to dinner at the best restaurant in the city. I have something to celebrate, and I want you to be there. His voice sounded different, almost mocking. But I, as always, wanted to believe that my son was finally including me in his successful life. I got ready with such care that night. I put on my best dress, an emerald green one that I had bought years ago but almost never wore. I meticulously did my hair, applied light makeup, and even put on my mother's pearl earrings. I wanted to look presentable for my successful son. Robert had prospered greatly in recent years. He was a regional manager for a major corporation, had a large house in the most exclusive neighborhood in Los Angeles, and his wife, Jessica, always wore incredibly expensive clothing. But with me, his own mother, he was increasingly cold and distant. I arrived at the Golden Crown restaurant exactly at 8 o'clock in the evening. It was an extremely elegant place, with white tablecloths, crystal glasses, and waiters dressed in tuxedos. The kind of place where a single dinner costs more than $200 per person. A place I knew very well, though Robert had no idea about that. When I asked for Robert Johnson's table, the waiter, Anthony, looked me up and down. My green dress, although it was my best outfit, looked modest compared to the elegant attire of the other women dining there. "Of course, ma'am. Follow me, please," he said to me with a professional smile. I walked, following him between the tables, feeling all the curious glances on me. Some people were whispering to each other, probably wondering what a woman like me was doing in such an exclusive place. Robert was already seated at a center table, next to Jessica. She was wearing a very expensive red dress and jewelry that glittered under the restaurant lights. As I approached, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was no chair for me. "Hello, son," I said with a forced smile, hoping he would stand up to give me a hug or at least explain where I was supposed to sit. Robert looked at me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, Mom, you made it." He didn't stand up. He didn't greet me warmly. Jessica didn't even look up from her plate. "And my chair?" I asked, feeling increasingly awkward. "Your chair." Robert burst out laughing, but it wasn't a joyful laugh. It was cruel, heartless. "Mum, I didn't invite you to dinner. I told you to come so you could see how successful people live, so you could understand the difference between you and us." I felt as if I had been punched in the stomach. People at nearby tables began to pay closer attention to us. "Son, I don't understand," I murmured, trying to maintain my dignity. "You don't understand." Robert raised his voice. "Mum, look at yourself. Look at this place. Do you really think you belong here? We come to this restaurant every week. We spend more on one dinner than you spend in an entire month." Jessica finally spoke, without looking up from her food. "Robert, don't be so harsh. Your mother isn't to blame for being, well, for being the way she is. Those words hurt me more than my own son's. The humiliation was so intense that I felt tears forming in my eyes. But there was something they didn't know, something I had kept secret all these years. And that night, that secret was about to come to light in the most spectacular way possible. "Robert, please," I whispered, trying to control the tremor in my voice. "I just wanted to spend a moment with you. It's been months since we've talked like mother and son." My son leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms as if he were enjoying my discomfort. "Talk? What are we going to talk about, Mum? About your boring life? About how you spend your days watching reality TV in your small apartment?" People at nearby tables were no longer pretending they weren't listening to our conversation. An elegant couple at the next table exchanged pitying glances toward me. I felt the heat rise up my neck, but something inside me told me to remain calm. "Son, I work hard. I've always worked hard to get ahead," I replied, trying to maintain my dignity. "I don't have much money, it's true, but I have my pride." Jessica let out a scornful giggle. "Pride? Susan, forgive me. But what can you be proud of? You live in a 2-bedroom apartment, you take the bus everywhere, and you buy your clothes at discount stores." Every word was like a stab. But what hurt the most was seeing the satisfied smile on my son's face. How had he become this cruel person? Where was the sweet boy I had raised with so much love? "Mum," Robert continued, raising his voice so more people could hear, "the truth is, I'm embarrassed to introduce you as my mother. Look at Jessica. Look how she dresses, how she talks, how she behaves. That's the kind of woman who belongs with someone like me." Jessica smiled complacently and smoothed her dyed blonde hair. Her red dress must have cost more than $1,000, and her shoes were from an Italian brand that I knew very well. Too well. "Jessica comes from an important family," Robert continued. "Her father owns 3 car dealerships. She went to a private university, speaks 3 languages, and understands business. And you? What can you teach me?" "How to survive on $200 a week." Tears threatened to spill from my eyes, but I held them back. There was something Robert didn't know, something Jessica didn't know either, something no one in my family knew, and that night, it was about to change their lives forever. The waiter, Anthony, discreetly approached our table. I had known him for years, although he couldn't say anything at that moment. He looked at me with an expression of concern in his eyes. "Do you wish to order anything else?" he asked politely. "No, thank you," Robert replied curtly. "My mother is not going to dine with us. In fact, I think it's time for her to leave." "But son," I murmured, "I thought you said you wanted to celebrate something with me." Robert laughed again. "Celebrate with you? Mum, what I want to celebrate is my promotion, my new position, my successful life. Do you think I want to celebrate that with someone who reminds me where I came from? Jessica and I belong to a different social level than yours." "Robert is right," added Jessica, taking a sip of her wine, which cost $100 a bottle. "We frequent these kinds of places because we can afford it. We have the money, the education, and the social class to be here. It's nothing personal against you, Susan, but there are differences that cannot be ignored." I looked around the restaurant. It was truly beautiful. The crystal lamps shone softly, the paintings on the walls were original works of art, and the piano music created a perfect atmosphere. Every detail had been carefully selected to create the most elegant experience possible. "This restaurant is truly beautiful," I commented in a low voice. "Of course it's beautiful," Robert responded arrogantly. "It's the most expensive one in the whole city. The waiting list to get a table here is 3 months. But when you have money and connections, Like us, doors open. Jessica nodded. We know the manager, the chef, and even the owner. Well, Robert knows the owner personally. That's why we always get the best table. A small smile appeared on my lips. If only he knew the truth about who really knew the owner of this restaurant. Mum, why are you smiling like that? Robert looked at me suspiciously. Do you find it funny that I'm explaining how the real world works? No, son, I responded calmly. I was just thinking about something. About what? About how you're right about one thing. Indeed, there are differences that cannot be ignored. Differences that you don't know, but that are going to become very clear tonight. Robert and Jessica exchanged a confused look. The tone of my voice had changed. It no longer sounded like the humble, submissive mother they knew. What are you talking about? Jessica asked with some uneasiness. Before I could answer, another waiter approached the table. It was Oscar, the restaurant manager. A distinguished man in his 50s, with an impeccable suit and refined manners. Good evening, he greeted politely. Is everything all right at your table? Robert puffed up in his chair, obviously pleased to receive the manager's attention. Everything's perfect, Oscar. As always, the service is exceptional. Oscar smiled professionally, but when his eyes met mine, I noticed a small flash of recognition. He knew who I was. Of course he knew. I'm glad to hear that, Oscar replied. Then he looked directly at me. Ma'am, are you enjoying your visit tonight? The question seemed innocent, but there was something more behind it. Robert didn't realize it, but I did. Oscar was waiting for my signal. Oscar, I told him with a firm voice, I think it's time for you to speak with the owner. There's a situation here that requires their immediate attention. Oscar nodded slowly, as if he had been waiting for those words all night. Of course, ma'am. The owner will be here in a moment. Robert frowned, clearly confused by the exchange. Owner? What are you talking about? Mum, do you know the manager of this place? Jessica also looked bewildered. Susan, how do you know Oscar? I smiled, but didn't answer. I simply waited. The next few minutes would be the most important of my life, and definitely the most impactful for my son. Meanwhile, Robert turned to Oscar with his typical arrogance. Hey, Oscar, I don't know what's going on here, but my mother is a little confused lately. Sometimes she says things that don't make sense. Age, you know. Oscar maintained his professional smile, but didn't comment. His silence only increased the tension at the table. Why aren't you answering? Robert insisted. Do you really know my mother? Young Robert, Oscar replied carefully. I think it's best we wait for the owner. He will be able to clear up all your doubts. Jessica leaned closer to Robert and whispered, This is really weird. Your mother is acting strangely. Do you think she's okay in the head? Her words were loud enough for me to hear, but instead of hurting me, they gave me more strength, because I knew that in a few minutes she would swallow every one of those words. People at nearby tables had noticed the tension. Some diners had stopped eating to discreetly observe what was happening. The murmur of conversations had lessened, as if the whole restaurant was waiting for something. Robert began to grow impatient. Mum, this is ridiculous. I don't know what game you're playing, but it's over. Jessica and I want to enjoy our dinner in peace. In peace, I repeated, my voice growing firmer. Like the peace you've given me all these years. Like the peace of being treated like a stranger by my own son. Enough, Robert shouted, slamming the table. Glasses rattled, and several people turned completely toward us. You're making a scene. You're embarrassing me in front of all these important people. Jessica put her hand on Robert's arm. Calm down, honey. People are watching us. Exactly. Robert stood up, his face red with anger. Mum, I'm going to ask you to leave right now. You're ruining my night, my celebration, my reputation. I remained seated, completely calm. Your reputation? The reputation of someone who treats his own mother like trash? You're not trash, Robert yelled, but his tone said the opposite. You are. You're just different from us. You belong to another world. A world of common people, of people without ambition, of people who settle for little. The words echoed throughout the restaurant. An uncomfortable silence took over the place. Even the waiters had stopped what they were doing to watch the scene. Jessica also stood up. Susan, please. Robert is right. This is not your place. Look around you. Look how the other people are seeing you. They're looking at you with pity. She was right about one thing. People were looking at me, but not with pity. There was something else in their expressions. Curiosity, expectation, as if they knew something important was about to happen. Do you know how much this dinner costs, Mum? Robert continued, pointing to the table. $300. Just for what we've consumed so far, it's more than you spend on food in an entire month. And do you know how much the wine you're drinking costs? I added calmly. $250 a bottle. Dom Perignon, 2015. An excellent choice. Robert looked at me in surprise. How do you know that? Because I know this place well, son. Very well. Jessica laughed out loud. You know this place well? Since when? Since when do you come to look at the menu from outside? Her comment provoked some nervous laughter from nearby tables, but I didn't flinch. At that moment, a familiar figure appeared, walking toward our table. It was a man in his 60s, distinguished, wearing a perfectly tailored grey suit and a presence that commanded immediate respect. Oscar followed closely behind. Robert recognized him immediately. Mr. Harrison, he exclaimed with a servile smile. What an honor to see you here. I'm Robert Johnson. I think we met briefly at the business conference last month. Harrison nodded politely. Yes, I vaguely recall, but his eyes were fixed on me. Good evening, Susan. The way he said my name made Robert freeze. It wasn't the greeting of a successful businessman to an ordinary older woman. It was the greeting of someone who knew me well. Very well. Good evening, Harrison, I replied naturally. I'm very sorry you had to come all the way here for this matter. Jessica looked at Robert, completely confused. How does your mother know Mr. Harrison? Robert stammered. I don't know. Mum, how do you know Mr. Harrison? Harrison approached the table more closely, and his presence made all the nearby diners fall completely silent. Ms. Johnson, he said to me formally, is there a problem I need to resolve? The formal way he addressed me as Ms. Johnson made Robert frown even more. Why was such an important man speaking to me with so much respect? Yes, there is a problem, I replied clearly. My son and his wife have gravely disrespected me. They have publicly humiliated me in this restaurant, told me I don't belong here, and asked me to leave. Harrison nodded seriously. I understand. And what would you like me to do about it? Robert interrupted desperately. Wait. Mr. Harrison, there's a misunderstanding. My mother is exaggerating. I was just explaining to her that this place is a little sophisticated for her. Harrison turned to Robert with a cold expression. Sophisticated for her? Are you telling your mother she has no right to be in this restaurant? That's not it, Robert protested. It's just that, well, she can't afford a dinner here. She lives on $200 a week. This is beyond her means. Jessica nodded vigorously. Exactly. We weren't being cruel, just realistic. This place costs a fortune. Harrison looked at me again. Is that true, Susan? You can't afford to dine here? A slow smile spread across my face. It was the moment I had been waiting for years, the moment my son would discover who his mother really was. Well, Harrison, I said, getting up from my chair, that depends on how you look at it. I took an envelope from my purse that I had been carrying with me for months, waiting for the perfect moment to use it. I placed it on the table, right in front of Robert. What is that? Jessica asked suspiciously. Open it, I told Robert. Open it and read what it says. Robert took the envelope with trembling hands. Jessica leaned in to get a better look. When Robert pulled out the documents and began to read, his face turned as pale as wax. No, it can't be, he murmured. What does it say? Jessica asked anxiously, trying to see the documents over Robert's shoulder. What can't be? Robert read aloud, his voice trembling. Certificate of ownership. The Golden Crown Restaurant. Owner, Susan Johnson Miller. His voice faded into a whisper. Date of acquisition, March 15th, 2018. The silence that followed was deafening. People at nearby tables had completely stopped pretending they weren't listening. Some had even slightly risen from their seats to get a better look at what was happening. Jessica snatched the papers from Robert's hands. This has to be fake. It has to be a joke. Susan, these documents are fake. Harrison cleared his throat. Ms. Johnson, I assure you those documents are completely authentic. Ms. Susan Johnson is indeed the owner of this restaurant, and also of 4 other restaurants in the city. 4 other restaurants? Robert exclaimed, still in shock. Mom, this is impossible. You live in a small apartment, you take the bus, you shop at discount stores. I sat down again, feeling more powerful than I had felt in years. It's true, son. I live simply because I choose to, but that doesn't mean I don't have money. How much money? Jessica asked, her voice barely audible. Harrison answered for me. Ms. Johnson has a net worth of approximately $8 million. Her restaurants generate annual profits of about $2 million. Robert slumped into his chair as if he had been physically struck. $8 million. Why? Jessica murmured. Why did you never tell us anything? I leaned back in my chair, observing the shocked and confused faces of my son and his wife. Because I wanted to know the true character of the people around me. I wanted to know if they would love me for who I am, not for what I have. But Mum, Robert stammered, I'm your son. How could you hide something like that from me? How could I hide it from you? I repeated, my voice filling with years of contained anger. Are you seriously asking me that after everything I just heard tonight? I stood up again, and this time my posture was completely different. I was no longer the humble, submissive, older woman. I was a successful businesswoman, a millionaire who had built an empire from scratch. Robert, for the last 5 years, since you started succeeding at your job, you've treated me like a burden. You've made me feel ashamed of my appearance, of the way I dress, of the way I live. People at nearby tables began to murmur among themselves. Some discreetly took out their phones, probably to record what was happening. Do you remember Christmas last year? I continued. When you told me it was better if I didn't go to your party because I wouldn't fit in with your important guests. Robert shrank in his seat. Mum, or Jessica's birthday 6 months ago. When you told me there was a dress code and that my clothes weren't appropriate for the event. Jessica avoided my gaze, clearly uncomfortable. All this time, I continued, you have assumed that I am poor, that I am a burden, that I am someone to be ashamed of. And tonight, you confirmed exactly what I suspected about you. Oscar discreetly approached and whispered in my ear, "Ms. Johnson, would you like us to ask them to leave the restaurant?" Before I could answer, Robert stood up abruptly. "Wait. Mum, if you have so much money, why do you live the way you live? Why didn't you tell me anything? We're family." "Family?" I burst out laughing, but it wasn't a joyful laugh. "Family? Robert, 15 minutes ago you yelled at me to go eat in the street like a beggar. That's what family does." Jessica tried to intervene. "Susan, if we had known—" "If you had known what?" I interrupted her. "If you had known I had money, would you have treated me with respect? Is that your definition of family love?" "Conditional respect based on financial status." A murmur of approval was heard from nearby tables. Clearly, the other diners were enjoying the show, and many seemed to be on my side. "Mum, please," Robert pleaded, "we can talk about this at home, in private." "In private," I pointed around the restaurant, "like when you humiliated me in public a few minutes ago. Like when you told all these witnesses that I don't belong here." Harrison approached me more closely. "Ms. Johnson, as the general manager of your properties, I must ask you, do you wish for us to take any specific action?" Robert turned to Harrison in desperation. "Mr. Harrison, please." "She is my mother. There must be some way to resolve this." "Young man," Harrison replied coldly, "you just spent the last 30 minutes insulting and humiliating the owner of this establishment. Not only that, but you did it in front of dozens of witnesses." Jessica began to cry. "We didn't know. If we had known she was the owner, we never would have—" "Never would have what?" I interrupted her. "Never would have disrespected me. Do you only respect rich people? What kind of values are those?" An elegant man at a nearby table began to applaud slowly. Soon, others joined in. It wasn't mocking applause, but admiration. They were applauding my stance, my dignity, my way of handling the situation. Robert looked around, noticing for the first time that all the attention of the restaurant was focused on us. "Mum, people are looking at us." "Yes, they're looking at us," I confirmed. "They are seeing exactly the kind of person you truly are. They are seeing how you treat your own mother when you think she has nothing to offer you." "But now I know you have money," Robert said desperately. "Now we know the truth. We can start over." "Start over?" I laughed bitterly. "Now that you know I have money, you want to start over? Now I'm good enough to be your mother?" Jessica wiped her tears and tried to take my hand. "Susan, please, forgive us. We didn't know." I abruptly pulled my hand away. "Jessica, an hour ago you told me Robert was embarrassed to introduce me as his mother. You told me I didn't have the education, the social class, or the money to be here. Do you remember?" She nodded miserably. "Well, you were right about one thing. Indeed, there are differences between us that cannot be ignored. But they're not the differences you thought." I walked toward the center of the restaurant, where everyone could see and hear me clearly. My voice rose with an authority I had never before shown in front of my son. "Ladies and gentlemen, fellow diners," I said, addressing the entire restaurant, "I am very sorry for the interruption to your dinner. But I believe it's important that you, as witnesses to what just occurred here, know the whole story." An absolute silence took over the place. Even the waiters stopped to listen. Robert tried to get up to stop me, but Harrison placed a firm hand on his shoulder, forcing him to remain seated. "My name is Susan Johnson, and I am the owner of this restaurant," I continued. "For the past 7 years, I have come here regularly, but always discreetly, observing how my business operates, getting to know my employees, ensuring my clients receive the best possible service." Some diners nodded, and I noticed that several recognized me now. The older woman, who sometimes sat alone at the corner table, who always ordered the same thing and left generous tips. But tonight, I continued, I was invited here by my own son, who publicly humiliated me, insulted me, and asked me to leave because, according to him, I don't belong in this place. A murmur of disapproval was heard throughout the restaurant. The expressions of the people showed a mixture of shock, indignation, and pity. Robert stood up abruptly. "Mum, stop. Don't do this. You're ruining my reputation." "Your reputation?" I turned to him with a cold smile. "Robert, you ruined your reputation yourself the moment you decided to treat your mother like trash in front of all these people." Jessica tried one last time to save herself. "Susan, please, understand our position. We had no way of knowing that I had money," I interrupted her. "Is that really your excuse? That you didn't know I had money? That's why it was okay to disrespect me." An elegant woman at a nearby table spoke loudly. "Exactly. Respect doesn't depend on how much money one has. It's a matter of basic education." Other voices joined in approval. The atmosphere of the restaurant had completely changed. It was no longer a quiet, elegant dinner. It was the scene of a public lesson on dignity and family respect. I turned back to Robert and Jessica. "But now that you know the truth, let me explain exactly how things are going to change." Robert looked desperate. "Mum, please, we can talk about this in private." "Not here, not in front of all these people." "Why not here?" I responded firmly. "You had no problem humiliating me here in front of all these people. So right here you are going to listen to what I have to say to you." Oscar approached and offered me a chair in the center, as if it were a stage. I sat down elegantly, feeling for the first time in years the power and respect I deserved. "Robert," I began, "during these last 5 years, since you started earning a good salary, you have completely changed. You have become arrogant, contemptuous, and you have forgotten where you come from." "Mum, Don't interrupt me." My voice echoed throughout the restaurant. "Now you are going to listen. You are going to listen to everything I have to tell you." Robert sank into his chair, clearly defeated. "Do you remember when you were 12 years old and you got pneumonia?" I continued. "Do you remember that we didn't have health insurance, and I worked 3 jobs for 2 months to pay for your treatment?" My voice broke slightly as I recalled those difficult moments. I worked in an office by day, cleaning buildings at night, and in a diner on weekends. I slept 3 hours a night to make sure you had everything you needed. People in the restaurant listened in absolute silence. Some older women had tears in their eyes. "And do you know why I did all that?" I asked, looking directly at Robert. "Because I loved you. Because you were my son. Not because you had money, not because you could give me something in return, but because a mother's love is unconditional." Jessica began to cry again, but these were no longer tears of self-pity. She seemed to finally be understanding the magnitude of what they had done. "But you, Robert," I continued, "your love for me turned out to be completely conditional. You love me only when it suits you, only when I don't embarrass you, only when I fit your image of success." An elderly man at a table in the back shouted, "That's right, Mom. Tell them the truth." The public's approval gave me even more strength. "Now let me tell you how I got my money, because it's important that you understand it wasn't by luck or inheritance." Robert looked up, clearly curious despite his humiliation. "After your father died when you were 15 years old," I explained, "I was left alone with a huge debt and a son to support. But instead of sinking into self-pity, I decided to fight. I stood up again, walking slowly around the table as I spoke. I started working as a waitress in a small restaurant, but I didn't settle for that. I watched, I learned. I studied every aspect of the business, how the kitchen worked, how the finances were managed, how customers were treated. The silence in the restaurant was total. Even the staff had stopped working to listen to my story. After 5 years, when I had enough experience and savings, I took out a loan and bought my first small restaurant. It was a modest place, in a humble neighborhood, but I turned it into a success, Jessica whispered. That's why you know so much about restaurants. Exactly, I replied, because I built this empire from scratch, with my own hands, with my own effort. Every restaurant I bought afterward was because I had proven I could make a business work. Robert finally spoke, his voice breaking. Mum, I didn't know any of this. You didn't know because you never asked, I snapped. You were never interested in my life. You only cared that I didn't embarrass you in front of your successful friends. Harrison approached again. Ms. Johnson, would you like us to proceed with the procedure? What procedure? Robert asked with panic. I turned to him with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. The expulsion procedure. As the owner of this establishment, I have the right to prohibit entry to anyone who causes disturbances or disrespects other clients. You can't do that, Jessica shouted. We're family. Family, I laughed. An hour ago you told me I wasn't good enough to be part of your family. Now that you know I have money, suddenly we're family again. Spontaneous applause erupted from several tables. The diners were clearly enjoying watching justice unfold. Robert stood up desperately. Mum, please, forgive me. Forgive us. We can change. We can be better. You can change, I repeated. You can be better. Robert, the problem isn't that you can change. The problem is that you only want to change now that you know I have money. I walked up to him, looking directly into his eyes. Tell me one thing, son. If right now I told you I actually don't have money, that all this has been a joke, how would you treat me? Would you ask me to leave the restaurant again? Robert opened his mouth to answer, but no words came out. The answer was clear in his silence. Robert's silence was more eloquent than any word. At that moment, both he and Jessica understood that they had been completely unmasked. Not just in front of me, but in front of the entire restaurant full of witnesses. Your silence says it all, son, I murmured, feeling a mixture of sadness and relief. After all, you know me better than you thought. Jessica tried one last desperate strategy. Susan, we can truly change. Robert has been under a lot of pressure at work lately. He hasn't been himself. I turned to her with a cold look. Pressure at work? Is that your excuse for treating an older woman poorly? For humiliating your husband's mother? A businessman at a nearby table stood up. Ma'am, with all due respect, I know Robert from work. And I can confirm that he talks about you in exactly the way he's treated you tonight. He always refers to you as my poor mother, or the burden I have to maintain. Period. Robert turned deathly pale. Mr. Miller, I never. That was taken out of context. Taken out of context, Mr. Miller laughed. Robert, last month, during the executive meeting, you literally said, my mother is a simple woman who doesn't understand my standard of living. Sometimes it's embarrassing to have to explain why she can't accompany me to important social events. Period. A murmur of indignation was heard throughout the restaurant. Robert tried to deny it, but the damage was already done. Do you see, Robert? I said with a calm voice. It's not just about tonight. It's about how you really think of me. It's about the shame you feel for your own mother. I addressed the entire restaurant again. Ladies and gentlemen, for years I have watched my son become a person I don't recognize. A person who values appearances more than feelings. A person who is ashamed of his roots. I walked slowly toward the large restaurant window, from where the entire illuminated city of Los Angeles could be seen. See that city out there? I started from the bottom, in the most humble neighborhoods. I worked washing dishes, cleaning tables, serving people who sometimes treated me poorly. But I never lost my dignity. I turned back to Robert, who had his head bowed, completely defeated. However, my own son, my own blood, has made me feel more humiliated in these last few years than any stranger ever has. Jessica began to cry harder. Susan, please, give us a chance. We can go to family therapy. We can fix this. Family therapy. I laughed bitterly. Jessica, do you really think this can be fixed with therapy? Do you think years of contempt and humiliation can be cured with a few sessions? Oscar approached discreetly. Ms. Johnson, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there are several reporters outside. It seems someone has leaked the story on social media. Do you want me to keep them away? Robert stood up abruptly. Reporters? Mum, this is going to ruin my career. My boss is going to find out. Everyone at my company is going to know what happened. Now you're worried about your career? I responded firmly. You weren't worried when you were yelling at me in front of the entire restaurant? It's different, Robert shouted desperately. This was a private family conversation. Private? I pointed around the crowded restaurant. You yell at your mother in a public restaurant and call it a private conversation. Mr. Miller intervened again. Robert, I regret to tell you, but several employees from our company are dining here tonight. The story has already reached the office. Your behavior will be evaluated by human resources. Robert sank into his chair as if he had received a physical blow. No, it can't be. My career. My reputation. Your reputation, I repeated slowly. You ruined it yourself the moment you decided it was acceptable to treat your mother like trash. Jessica tried to take Robert's hand, but he pulled it away abruptly. This is all your fault, he yelled at her. You were the one who convinced me my mother was a burden. You were the one who told me to be ashamed of her. My fault? Jessica stood up indignantly. You were the one who was constantly complaining about her. I was just supporting you. And there it was, the truth finally coming to light. Not only had they humiliated me tonight, but they had been speaking ill of me for years, feeding each other's contempt for me. Enough, I said firmly. Enough blaming each other. You are both equally responsible. I addressed Harrison. Please, bring the documents. What documents? Robert asked with terror in his voice. Harrison disappeared for a few minutes and returned with a thick folder. He opened it on the table and pulled out several papers. These, I said solemnly, are the documents that confirm I am the owner not only of this restaurant, but of a chain of 5 restaurants throughout the city. Jessica looked at the papers with wide eyes. 5 restaurants? Yes, 5 restaurants, including the Secret Garden, where you celebrated your anniversary last year, including Ocean View, where Robert took his important clients last month, including the Golden Terrace, where Jessica celebrated her birthday. Robert looked up abruptly. You are the owner of all those places. That's right. And every time you have gone to those restaurants, boasting about your success, your money, your social status, you have been spending money at businesses that belong to me. The irony of the situation was lost on no one. Several diners began to laugh softly, enjoying the poetic justice of the moment. But there's something else, I continued, pulling out another document from the folder. This is my current will. The silence that followed was absolute. You could even hear the sound of forks hitting plates at the furthest tables. In this will, I said clearly, I left my entire fortune to my only son, Robert Johnson. $8 million, 5 restaurants, and several real estate properties. Robert's eyes widened. You left? Why do you say you left? I smiled, but it wasn't a joyful smile. It was the smile of someone who had finally found justice. Because after tonight, after what you have proven yourself to be, that will is going to change. No, Robert shouted, standing up so abruptly that his chair fell backward. Mom, please. I'm your only son. I'm your family. My family. I burst out laughing. Robert, an hour ago you told me to go eat in the street like a beggar. That's how you treat your family. Jessica also stood up, panic in her eyes. Susan, please, think carefully. Robert made a mistake, but he doesn't deserve to lose his entire inheritance. Blood is thicker than water. Blood is thicker than water, I repeated. Then why has my own blood treated me worse than any stranger? I turned to the entire restaurant. Ladies and gentlemen, you have witnessed everything that has happened here tonight. You have seen how my son has treated me, how he has humiliated me, how he has been ashamed of me. The diners nodded, many with expressions of approval toward my stance. Well, I continued, you are also going to witness the consequences. I took my cell phone from my purse and dialed a number that Robert didn't recognize. Good evening, Dr. Anthony Smith. Yes, this is Susan Johnson. I need you to come to the Golden Crown restaurant immediately with the documents we prepared last week. Yes, it's urgent. The new will. Robert froze. New will? You already prepared a new will? I ended the call and looked him directly in the eyes. Robert, did you really think this was the first time you had humiliated me? Did you think I hadn't realized how you treated me all these years? Jessica intervened desperately. But Susan, don't you think you're being too drastic? He's your only son. Drastic? I turned to her with contained fury. Jessica, for the last 5 years, your husband has systematically excluded me from his life. He has made me feel like a stranger in my own family. I walked toward the center of the restaurant, where everyone could hear me clearly. My voice rose with an authority that surprised even myself. Do you want to know why I decided to live simply despite having money? I asked the entire restaurant. Because I wanted to test something. I wanted to see if the people who claimed to love me truly did so for who I am, not for what I have. A murmur of understanding spread through the tables. People were beginning to understand the depth of my social experiment. For 7 years, I continued, I have lived in a modest apartment. I have worn simple clothes. I have taken the bus. And I have acted as if I were an ordinary retiree. And do you know what I discovered? Robert was looking at me with increasing terror, as if he finally understood the magnitude of what he had done. I discovered that my own son was ashamed of me. I discovered that he saw me as a burden. I discovered that he preferred to exclude me from his life rather than explain to his rich friends that he had a poor mother, period. Tears began to form in my eyes, but my voice remained firm. Do you know what it feels like for your own son to ask you not to go to his wedding because you don't fit the event's standard? A gasp was heard from several tables. Some older women had their hands over their hearts, clearly moved by my words. Robert turned pale. Mum, I never said exactly that. No? I took out my phone and searched through my messages. Here is your literal message from April 15th, 2023. Mum, Jessica and I have decided to have a small wedding, only close family and important friends. I think it would be better if you don't come. The venue is very elegant, and I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. Period. I read the message aloud so the entire restaurant could hear. The reaction was immediate. Murmurs of indignation, some applause of support for me, and expressions of shock on the faces of the diners. "That message doesn't say you can't come," Robert protested desperately. "No?" I continued reading. "Also, most of the guests are colleagues from my work and important clients. I need to maintain a certain professional image. Period." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Jessica looked ashamed. "Maintain a certain professional image," I repeated slowly. Translated, your mother would ruin your professional image. An older man at a table in the back stood up. "Ma'am, my mother was right when she said ungrateful children are the worst misfortune a woman can have." Several diners applauded his comment. The atmosphere of the restaurant had completely changed. It was no longer just a spectacle. It had become a public judgment on family values. Robert looked around the restaurant, noticing for the first time that all the attention was truly focused on us. "Mum, please, let's go home. We can talk about this in private." "Home," I laughed bitterly. "Which home, Robert? My modest apartment that embarrasses you so much? Or your big house in the exclusive neighborhood, where I've never been welcome?" Jessica tried to intervene. "Susan, you've always been welcome in our home." "Welcome." I took out my phone again. "Let me read you some of the messages Jessica has sent me over the last 2 years. Jessica turned pale. "No, please." "Message from December 8th, 2024, I read aloud. "Susan, Robert and I are having a Christmas dinner with our friends. I think it would be better if you come another day when we can dedicate more time to you. Period." I continued reading. Message from March 22nd, 2024. "Susan, we have important guests this weekend. Could you come visit us during the week when it's quieter?" Every message I read generated more murmurs of disapproval from nearby tables. "Do you see the pattern?" I asked the restaurant. There was always an excuse. There was always a reason why I couldn't be present when there were important people. Period. Robert slumped into his chair, completely defeated. "Mum, we thought you preferred—" "That I preferred what?" I interrupted him. "That I preferred to be alone? That I preferred to be excluded from my only son's life?" At that moment, the restaurant door opened, and a distinguished man in his 60s entered, carrying a leather briefcase. It was Dr. Anthony Smith, my lawyer. "Good evening, Ms. Johnson," he greeted formally. "I brought the documents you requested." Robert stood up abruptly. "What documents? Mum, please don't do anything you'll regret." "Regret?" I turned to him with a cold smile. "Robert, the only thing I regret is not having done this sooner." Dr. Smith opened his briefcase and took out several documents. "Ms. Johnson, here is the new will we prepared last week, as well as the property transfer documents we discussed." "Property transfer?" Jessica asked with a broken voice. "Yes," I replied calmly. "I have decided to leave my fortune to charities that help elderly people abandoned by their families, and also to loyal employees who have shown me more respect and affection than my own blood." Anthony, the waiter who had been serving us all night, approached timidly. "Ms. Johnson, are you sure you want to do this here, in front of so many people?" I smiled at him with genuine affection. "Anthony, for 5 years you have been kinder to me than my own son. You have always treated me with respect, no matter how I was dressed or how much money you thought I had." Anthony blushed. "You've always been a very elegant lady, Ms. Johnson, and you always leave the best tips." "Tips?" Robert looked at me confused. "What tips?" Anthony replied. "Your mother always leaves $100 tips, young man, and she always asks about our families, about our problems, She is the most generous and kind client we have. Robert opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Clearly, this was another revelation he hadn't expected. That's right, I confirmed. All these years, while you thought I lived on $200 a week, I was financially helping employees who needed it, donating to charities and supporting families in difficulty. Jessica murmured. How much money have you donated? In the last 5 years, I replied, I have donated approximately $1 million to different causes. Money I could have used to live luxuriously, but which I preferred to use to help others. Spontaneous applause erupted from several tables. The diners clearly approved of my philanthropic actions. While you were ashamed of my poverty, I continued, I was using my money to do good. While you excluded me for not being sophisticated enough, I was being more generous than you have ever been. Robert stood up in desperation. Mum, all that is very well, but I am your son. I am your only family. You can't leave all your money to strangers. Strangers? I burst out laughing. Robert, Anthony knows me better than you do. Oscar respects me more than you do. The employees of my restaurants have shown me more affection than you have in the last 5 years. I turned to Dr. Smith. Doctor, please prepare the documents. I want to sign the new will this very night. No, Robert shouted, trying to get closer to the table where the documents were. You can't do this. I'm your son. I have rights, Oscar intervened firmly. Young man, please maintain your composure. Ms. Johnson has every right to dispose of her fortune as she sees fit. This is crazy. Jessica began to cry hysterically. Susan, Robert made a mistake, but he doesn't deserve to lose his entire inheritance. I stopped a few steps from the table where the documents were and slowly turned toward Jessica. A mistake? You call 5 years of constant humiliations a mistake? Dr. Smith placed the documents on the main table where everyone could see. Ms. Johnson, before proceeding, I must ask you, are you completely sure of this decision? Once signed, these documents will be legally binding. Doctor, I replied with a firm voice, I have never been more sure of something in my life. Robert ran toward the table, but Oscar and 2 waiters stopped him gently but firmly. Mum, wait. Give me a chance to explain. Give me a chance to change. A chance? I turned to him in disbelief. Robert, you've had 5 years of chances. Every time you excluded me from an event, it was a lost chance. Every time you were ashamed of me, it was a lost chance. Jessica stood up, swaying slightly. Susan, please, think about this rationally. If you take Robert's inheritance away, you're also punishing your future grandchildren. A sad smile crossed my face. My future grandchildren? Jessica, you've been married for 3 years. How many times have you included me in conversations about having children? How many times have you made me feel like I would be a welcome grandmother? Jessica couldn't answer. The truth is, I continued, you don't want me to be part of your future children's lives. You don't want a poor, uneducated grandmother influencing the upbringing of your successful children, period. A murmur of understanding was heard throughout the restaurant. The diners could clearly see the logic in my words. Dr. Smith opened the folder of documents. Ms. Johnson, here are the new documents. The will divides your fortune among 5 charities and 10 employees of your restaurants who have demonstrated exceptional loyalty. Robert tried to approach again, but this time his voice was pleading. Mum, please, at least leave me a small part. Not everything, but something. A chance to show you I can change. I paused with the pen in my hand. A small part, so you can continue living comfortably without learning anything from this experience. No, Robert protested. So I can prove I've learned my lesson. So I can win you back. Jessica approached me with tears in her eyes. Susan, give him a chance. Put conditions on him. Make him earn your forgiveness. I looked at my son, who was standing there with red eyes and a distraught face. For the first time in years, I saw real vulnerability in him, not the superficial arrogance he had shown for so long. Conditions, I repeated slowly. What kind of conditions? Robert lit up with hope. Whatever you want, Mum. Anything. I'll do whatever it takes. Dr. Smith looked at me questioningly. Ms. Johnson, do you want us to explore that option? We can create a conditional will. I walked slowly around the table, considering the possibilities. The entire restaurant was in absolute silence, awaiting my decision. Very well, I said finally. If you truly want a chance, Robert, here are my conditions. Robert nodded desperately. Yes, anything. First condition, I announced clearly so the entire restaurant could hear. For the next year, you and Jessica are going to volunteer at a retirement home. Every weekend. No exceptions. Jessica opened her mouth to protest, but Robert stopped her. I accept. What else? Second condition. You are going to move out of your big house and live on a budget of $1,500 a month. The same budget you thought I had. Robert paled. But Mum, my mortgage, my expenses. What, Robert? Can't you live on the budget you considered appropriate for your mother? The comment generated some nervous laughter from nearby tables. Third condition, I continued. You are going to work part-time at one of my restaurants. As a waiter, you are going to experience what it's like to serve others, to treat people of all social classes with respect. As a waiter, Jessica asked in horror. But Robert is an executive. Exactly, I replied. And it's time for him to learn humility. Robert took a deep breath. I accept. Are there more? Fourth condition. You are going to write public letters of apology. A letter to the local newspaper apologizing for your behavior toward the elderly. A letter to your company taking responsibility for your lack of family values. The color completely drained from Robert's face. Mum, that would ruin my career. Your career? I laughed. Robert, after what happened here tonight, your career is already ruined. This would at least give you the opportunity to save it with dignity. Mr. Miller, Robert's colleague, stood up. Excuse me, Ms. Johnson, but I must tell you that the company is already considering suspending Robert. His behavior tonight goes against all our corporate values. Robert turned to him in desperation. Mr. Miller, please. I'm sorry, Robert, Mr. Miller responded firmly. Our company values family respect and personal integrity. What we have seen here tonight is unacceptable. I turned back to Robert. See, your career is already in jeopardy. My conditions would at least give you a way to redeem yourself. And the fifth condition? Robert asked with a broken voice. The fifth condition is the most important, I said solemnly. For an entire year, you and Jessica are going to visit me every week. Not because I have money, but because I am your mother. You are going to spend time with me. You are going to really get to know me. You are going to learn who I am as a person. Jessica murmured. That doesn't sound so hard. No, I turned to her. Jessica, when was the last time you had a real conversation with me? A conversation where you asked me about my dreams, my fears, my life experiences. Jessica couldn't answer. And do you know what the sixth condition is? I added. Sixth, Robert asked nervously. If during this year of probation you fail to comply with any of these conditions, or if you demonstrate that you are only acting for the money, the original will automatically be activated. All the money will go to charity. Dr. Smith nodded. That is perfectly legal, Ms. Johnson. We can create a conditional will with those specifications. Robert looked at Jessica, who nodded reluctantly. I accept all the conditions. Mum, I completely accept them. Good, I said, taking the pen. But there is one more thing I need to say before signing any document. The entire restaurant held its breath. What happened here tonight cannot be undone. The words you said, the humiliation you caused me, the pain you made me feel, that is already part of our history. Robert nodded with tears in his eyes. I know, Mum. I know, and I'm very sorry. Don't tell me you're sorry, I responded firmly. Show me over the next year that you have really learned something from this experience. I turned to Dr. Smith. Doctor, prepare the conditional will with all the conditions I have mentioned. Of course, Ms. Johnson, he replied, beginning to write. While the lawyer prepared the documents, I addressed the entire restaurant once more. Ladies and gentlemen, you have witnessed a very important lesson tonight. You have seen what happens when people value money more than respect, when they confuse material success with human worth. Applause began from one table and spread throughout the restaurant. It was applause of approval, of respect, of admiration for the way I had handled the situation. I hope, I continued, that all of you will remember this night when you interact with your own families. I hope you remember that respect and love do not have an entrance fee. The applause grew stronger. Some people stood up, giving me an ovation. Robert approached me timidly. Mom, can I hug you? I looked at him for a long moment. Robert, hugs are something you earn. Over the next year, you are going to have to earn every hug, every smile, every moment of affection. He nodded, finally understanding the magnitude of what he had lost. 6 months after that night that changed everything, I found myself sitting at the same table at the Golden Crown restaurant. But this time, the atmosphere was completely different. There was no tension, no shouting, no humiliation. There was only a 65-year-old woman watching her son work as a waiter in her own restaurant. Robert approached my table with a tray in his hands, wearing the restaurant's black uniform. His face no longer showed arrogance or shame. There was something new in his eyes, genuine humility. Good evening, Ms. Johnson, he said to me with a smile that seemed real for the first time in years. What would you like to order tonight? I smiled, but maintained my composure. Robert, how has your day been? Difficult, he admitted, sitting in the chair opposite me when I motioned for him. A client yelled at me because their soup was too hot. Another complained because it took me 30 seconds to bring them water. And a woman treated me as if I were invisible. And how did that make you feel? I asked, although I already knew the answer. Robert lowered his gaze. Horrible. Humiliated. As if I weren't a complete person. He raised his eyes to me. How did I make you feel for so many years? It was the first time in months that he had directly admitted the parallel between his current experience and how he had treated me. It was progress. And Jessica, I asked, how is she handling the changes? Better than I expected, Robert replied honestly. At first, she complained a lot about the small apartment, the limited budget, the volunteer work at the retirement home. But something changed a few weeks ago. What changed? She met an 80-year-old woman named Teresa. Her children abandoned her 5 years ago. She hasn't received a single visit all that time. Robert paused, his eyes slightly watering. Jessica realized that woman was exactly what you would have become if I had continued down the same path. I felt a warmth in my chest. It was the first time I had heard that Jessica had made a real emotional connection with the situation. Teresa told Jessica how her children only visited when they needed money, Robert continued. How they promised to come for dinner, but always had last-minute excuses. How she felt invisible in her own family, and that affected her. Jessica cried all night after that conversation. She told me she finally understood why you had done what you did. She told me that we were turning you into Teresa. Oscar discreetly approached our table. Ms. Johnson, forgive the interruption. Mr. Robert has been an excellent employee. He always arrives early, treats everyone with respect, and customers comment positively on his service. Robert blushed slightly at the praise. Thank you, Oscar. I'm learning a lot. After Oscar walked away, I looked at my son intently. Robert, can I ask you something honestly? Of course, Mum. Are you doing all this just for the money? Just for the inheritance? Robert was silent for a long moment. It was a question I had been waiting for the right moment to ask. At first, he finally admitted, yes. The first few weeks, every action I took was calculated. Every word I said was to impress you. I was acting to get my inheritance back. His honesty surprised me. But, I asked, sensing there was more. But something changed when I started working here, when I started really interacting with people from different social classes, when I started seeing how the employees spoke about you with so much affection and respect. Robert paused. I realized that for years, I had been living in a bubble of arrogance. He leaned forward, his voice becoming more intense. Mum, I really got to know Anthony for the first time. Did you know he has 3 children and is paying for his eldest daughter's college by working here? Did you know that you secretly paid for his gallbladder surgery last year? I smiled softly. Anthony is a good man. And I treated him as if he were invisible. I treated him as if he were just a waiter. But he is a hard-working father. He is a noble man. He is someone who deserves respect. Robert ran his hands through his hair. How could I have been so blind? And what about your career? I asked. Do you regret losing your executive position? Robert burst out laughing, but it wasn't a bitter laugh. You know what? No. And that surprises even me. Why not? Because I realized that my success was built on false values. I realized that I was so obsessed with impressing others that I lost sight of who I really was. At that moment, Jessica entered the restaurant. She no longer wore expensive dresses or ostentatious jewelry. She wore simple but elegant clothes, and there was something different about her posture. She seemed more authentic. Hello, Susan, she greeted me, and for the first time in years, her greeting sounded genuine. How are you? Fine, Jessica. How was the retirement home today? Emotional, she replied, sitting next to Robert. Teresa taught me how to knit. And she told me stories about her youth during the war. The wisdom these people have is incredible. I saw that Robert looked at her with admiration. It was clear that these changes in Jessica had also strengthened their relationship. Susan, Jessica continued, I want to apologize to you. Not just for that night at the restaurant, but for years of terrible behavior. What exactly do you mean? I asked. I needed to know that she understood exactly what she had done wrong. I mean all the times I excluded you from our lives, because I thought you weren't sophisticated enough. I mean all the times I influenced Robert to be ashamed of you. I mean having judged your worth as a person based solely on your economic appearance. Her words sounded sincere. And now that you know I have money, how do you feel about it? Honestly, Jessica smiled sadly. I feel like an idiot. All these months working with the elderly, I have met so many extraordinary people who live on very little money but have immense emotional wealth. Robert nodded. Mum, we've learned that real wealth has nothing to do with the money in the bank. I took an envelope from my purse and placed it on the table. Robert and Jessica looked at it with curiosity and some nervousness. What is that? Robert asked. It's an evaluation, I replied. Over these 6 months, I have been watching, asking questions, investigating. I've talked to your supervisors at the retirement home, to your co-workers here at the restaurant, to your neighbours in the small apartment. Jessica turned pale. An evaluation of what? Of whether your changes are genuine, or if you are only acting for the money. I opened the envelope and pulled out several papers. Here is the report from the retirement home supervisor. It says that you not only meet your required hours, but often stay extra time. It says that you have emotionally connected with the residents. Robert and Jessica exchanged hopeful glances. Here is Oscar's report on Robert's performance as a waiter. It says he is respectful, hard-working, and genuinely cares about the customer's experience, I continued reading. And here are the observations from your neighbours about how you live now. They say you are humble, that you help other residents, that you don't complain about your reduced circumstances. And what is your conclusion? Jessica asked with a trembling voice. I put the papers back in the envelope and looked them directly in the eyes. My conclusion is that you have learned your lesson. Not completely, because 6 months don't erase 5 years of problematic behaviour, but you have shown that change is possible. Robert began to smile hopefully. Does that mean what? That means, I said solemnly, that we are going to continue with this process, but with modifications. What kind of modifications? Jessica asked. First, Robert is going to continue working at the restaurant, but now he will receive a fair salary and will have the opportunity to learn the business from the bottom up. If he demonstrates real capacity and dedication, he could eventually have a role in management. Robert nodded enthusiastically. Second, you are going to move to a larger apartment, but you will not return to your previous lifestyle. You are going to live comfortably, but modestly. And third, I continued, we are going to start spending time together as a family. Real time, not an act. We are going to get to know each other as people. Jessica began to cry, but these were tears of relief and gratitude. Thank you, Susan. Thank you for giving us this chance. Don't thank me yet, I said firmly. This is just the beginning. You have to keep proving that these changes are permanent. Robert took my hand. Mum, I want you to know something. Even if you decide not to leave me any money, these months have been the most valuable of my life. I have learned who I really want to be. For the first time in years, I allowed tears to flow freely down my cheeks. You know what, Robert? That is the only thing I ever wanted to hear you say. I stood up and looked around the restaurant where everything had changed 6 months ago. Tonight, when those cruel words left your mouth, I thought I had lost my son forever. But now I see that I didn't lose him. He had only been hidden beneath layers of arrogance and false values. Robert stood up as well and looked me in the eyes. Mum, can I hug you now? I smiled, remembering my words from that night, that hugs were something you earned. Yes, son, you have earned this hug. When Robert hugged me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, the unconditional love of a son who finally understood the worth of his mother, not for her money, not for what she could give him, but for who she was as a person. Jessica joined the hug, And for the first time in a long time, I truly felt like I had a family. As we separated, I looked toward the restaurant tables. Some of the diners who had witnessed that terrible night were there again, and several smiled at me and nodded in approval. "Do you know what the most ironic thing about all this is?" I said to Robert. "What?" "That by losing your arrogance and your obsession with money, you have finally become someone worthy of inheriting a fortune." Robert smiled, but it was a different smile. It was the smile of someone who had found something more valuable than money. He had found his humanity. And I, Susan Johnson, had found something I thought I had lost forever. I had found my son. Real wealth, after all, is not measured in dollars. It is measured in respect, in genuine love, and in the ability to see the value in every person, regardless of what they have or do not have. That night, as we left the restaurant together as a true family for the first time in years, I knew I had made the right decision. Sometimes, to save someone you love, you first have to be willing to lose them. And sometimes, the greatest wealth you can leave your children is not money, but the lesson of how to be a good person.